Years ago, when I would visit the Almaky County Courthouse in Waukon, there was a bronze plaque dedicated to men who lost their lives during World War II. Included on the list was John W. Colsch, a 26-year-old pilot who perished when his plane crashed near Cherisy, France, in the aftermath of D-Day. This is his story. John Wilfred Colsch was born April 28, 1918, to Leo and Nellie Colsch in a place called Sand Cove near New Albin. His father, Leo, was described as a tall man, medium build, with brown eyes and dark hair. Less than a year earlier, in 1917, Leo had been drafted along with his brother Nicholas. Leo was granted an exemption from military duty because he was a self-employed farmer who had a wife and 3 young children at that time. John's mother, Ellen Gertrude Luth Colsch, was affectionately referred to as Nellie. Nellie was a petite, amiable young lady who made a home for herself, her husband, and her soon-to-be 5 children in this tiny log cabin. John had an older brother, Peter, and 2 older sisters, Cecilia and Mary. A younger sister, Ellen, was born 2 years after John. A younger brother, Alfred, died in infancy a year later. In 1929, Leo and Nellie Colsch, along with their children, moved to Charles City, where Leo and his oldest son, Peter, took a job working at Sherman Nursery. It was there that John, along with his father, flew in an airplane for the first time. John and his sisters attended school in Charles City. In 1932, Leo and Nellie returned to New Albin with their family. Their oldest daughter, Cecilia, had entered the nursing program at St. Joseph Mercy Hospital in Mason City by then. Their second oldest daughter, Mary, chose to stay in Charles City, where she was to finish her senior year at Immaculate Conception High School. Peter joined his father, Leo, in becoming a carpenter and a farmer. John and his younger sister, Ellen, continued their education by attending the New Albin Public Schools. From 1932 to 1935, John attended New Albin High School. Here he is pictured with his classmates. He is the 3rd person from the right. John was a good student and well-liked by other members of his class. During high school, John worked with several of his fellow classmates to successfully organize an orchestra. In May 1935, he graduated. In August of 1935, John enrolled at Loras College in Dubuque. Loras was known as Columbia College at that time. He lived at 674 West 8th Street, about 7 blocks from campus. During the 1935-36 academic year, John studied subjects such as qualitative analysis and composition. He was named to the dean's list, yet he felt compelled to serve his country in another capacity. After returning to New Albin during the summer of 1936, John chose to enlist in the Navy rather than return to Loras. He seemed to enjoy the camaraderie. It was during boot camp in the Navy that he earned the nickname Smiley. While training in the Navy, he received special recognition as a bombardier and a gunner. John spent 4 years in the Navy, from October 1936 until September 1940. He was named Honor Man of his company and was recognized for his service by receiving the Navy Good Conduct Medal. A month later, John enlisted in the Army Air Corps. In October of 1940, John enrolled at the Curtiss Wright Aeronautical Engineering School in Glendale, California. This school was operated by the Curtiss Wright Corporation for purposes of training pilots and aircraft maintenance mechanics. After receiving the 2nd highest score in his class during engineering school, he was selected as one of 150 men to write tests for cadets in flight training programs at the University of Southern California. At that time, USC served as a preparatory flight cadet school and hosted Army Air Corps, Marine Corps, and Navy training programs. Shortly thereafter, he was accepted to train as an aviation cadet at Cal Aero Academy in Ontario, California. Cal Aero Academy was a civilian aviation school contracted by the Army Air Corps to train pilots. During World War II, the school trained approximately 4,000 Army Air Corps fighter and bomber pilots each year for the war effort. While training at Cal Aero Academy, the comedy team of Abbott and Costello joined aviation cadets to film scenes for the movie Keep 'em Flying. John became personally acquainted with Bud Abbott, Lou Costello, and Martha Ray. During filming of the movie, he appeared in a scene where he marched as a flag bearer for his company. Back in New Albin, his family would later recall watching the movie outdoors and cheering when he appeared on screen. Upon completion of his training at Ontario, he was transferred to Stockton Field, California, for 10 weeks of advanced training. On March 19, 1942, he received his commission and his silver wings. His first assignment after commissioning was to Las Vegas Army Airfield, where he helped train aerial gunners for combat. This assignment was apparently due to his prior experience in the Navy. John's next assignment was to Dodge City Army Airfield in Kansas, where the Army Air Force's pilot school trained pilots on the B-25 and B-26 bombers. He was trained on the B-26 Marauder, a medium bomber. It was 71 feet long, had a wingspan of 58 feet, and was powered by two 1,900 horsepower engines. It was armed with machine guns and could deliver a bomb load up to 4,000 pounds. It was a low-level bomber and was more maneuverable than the larger four-engine bombers. The B-26 typically carried a crew of 6. After completing B-26 training, John was transferred to MacDill Air Base near Tampa, Florida. MacDill was the home base for the 391st Bombardment Group. There were four squadrons flying the B-26 planes assigned to the 391st Group. John was assigned to the 573rd Bombardment Squadron. Then he was transferred to a replacement training unit at Lake Charles Army Airfield in Lake Charles, Louisiana. At the replacement training unit, his flight crew was formed and they underwent training as a unit. His next move was to Hunter Airfield in Savannah, Georgia, where his crew received additional training and was assigned an aircraft, which they prepared for overseas flight and combat. After further operating and training at Myrtle Beach Bombing Range in South Carolina, the 391st Bomb Group began preparations for deployment overseas. While waiting for deployment overseas, John was assigned to check crews who were being sent into combat. He was stationed in Pocatello, Idaho, a short while before being transferred to Wendover Field in Utah. John and his 5 crew members were notified of their overseas assignment during the first week of January 1944. On January 27, the aircraft departed West Palm Beach, Florida on a trip that would take them through Puerto Rico, British Guiana, Brazil, Ascension Island, Liberia, Senegal, and French Morocco before finally arriving at St. Magan, England on January 30th, 1944. From St. Magan, they flew to their initial operating base at Matching, England. There is little information available to reflect which specific missions John flew or what targets he struck. We know that the 391st Bomb Group flew its first combat mission on February 16. That mission and another mission on February 21 were recalled because of bad weather over their targets. On February 23rd, their first bombs were dropped on an airfield in Holland. Missions that followed targeted airfields, railroad facilities, communication facilities, bridges, and other enemy sites primarily north of Paris and into Belgium. As D-Day approached, emphasis turned to enemy facilities along the coast of Normandy. That emphasis continued as the D-Day invasion unfolded on June 6, 1944. For many weeks afterward, the 391st Bombardment Group continued to provide aerial support for Allied ground troops as they fought against the German army in France. Approximately 14 days after D-Day, Donald Grant, a reporter for the Des Moines Register, flew on a mission with John and his crew. Grant's article was printed in the June 26, 1944 issue of the Des Moines Register. A few moments ago, Grant wrote, I was sitting in a Marauder medium bomber watching a German Army headquarters go up in smoke. Flying the plane I rode in was Lieutenant John Colsch of New Albin. It all began last night when Colonel Gerald Williams, commander of this Marauder group, started telling me about his Iowa boys, including Colsch, whom he said is quiet around the base, but a demon in the air. The next thing I knew, this afternoon, I was being issued a lot of heavy, uncomfortable equipment and hurrying over to the briefing hut with Lieutenant Colsch and the crew of his plane that day, the San Antonio Rose. Grant went on to write about the hundreds of ships coming and going across the English Channel, the lines of equipment and supplies on the Normandy beaches, and the concentration of Allied forces along their route to Cherbourg, France, where their target for the day was situated. It looked to me as if all the goods in the world were moving across or against the Germans today, but Colsch said it was like that every day. He wrote about the flak, which seemed heavy enough at times to park the airplane on, some of which bounced around in his airplane without causing injuries. How we got through, I can't say, but these boys just know how to do those things. It was Colsch's 44th mission today, so he isn't exactly an amateur. The planes were so close together that the wings nearly touched. Grant also wrote about a ghost ship that tried to join their formation on the trip home. The ghost ship, he wrote, is a captured Marauder flown by the Germans, which sometimes works its way into an American formation and shoots it down. We kept the ghost ship at more than arm's length with bursts of machine gun fire, then reported the thing to our nearest fighter base. Pretty soon, U.S. fighter planes appeared above us. We left the ghost ship to them. After the mission, Donald Grant and John Colsch had a chat over a Red Cross donut. John planned to continue flying after the war, but he wanted to win in Europe and then go to Burma and fight the Japanese. Colsch, Grant wrote, is a small, quiet, smallish boy with a sweet smile which has caught notice of a British wren whom he sees in London when on leave. A wren was a member of the Women's Royal Naval Service, a branch of the United Kingdom's Royal Navy. Colsch said it was all right for me to tell this because the girl he used to take to the movies in Lansing in his father's old Buick had other plans now anyway. Over the next month and a half, John flew 20 more missions. Then on August 13, 1944, he once again lifted his B-26 Marauder, named the Purring Panther, from the soil of England. 64 times he and his crew had done so, but this time held special significance. It was their last scheduled mission. With 65 missions complete, they could return to family and friends back home in the United States. John had been asked to serve as flight commander and formation leader of the 391st Bombardment Group, and he had accepted that offer. A crew member and another Marauder on that mission recorded what happened that day. Elmer Hansard was a tail gunner on another plane. Elmer wrote, "We went to Druix and bombed a bridge that was giving our boys on the ground trouble. The flak was terrific. Colsch's plane and Boyd's plane were knocked down, one with the tail knocked off and the other with a wing off. No one bailed out. First Lieutenant John W. Colsch and his crew were all killed in that crash." The following Tuesday, Leo and Nellie received word in a telegram from the War Department that their son, Lieutenant John Colsch, had been missing in action in France since August 13. On October 16, Leo and Nellie received a letter from the War Department, which read in part, "Further information has been received indicating that Lieutenant Colsch was the pilot of a B-26 Marauder bomber which participated in a bombing mission to France on August 13. Full details are not available, but the report indicates that during this mission at about 7:35 p.m., in the vicinity of the target, your son's bomber sustained damage from enemy aircraft fire, left the formation, and went into a spin. The report further indicates that one parachute was observed to leave the disabled craft before it fell to the earth, and inasmuch as the crew members of accompanying planes were unable to furnish any further details regarding the loss of Lieutenant Colsch's bomber, these facts constitute all the information presently obtainable." However, it was not enemy flak that caused those two aircraft to fall from the sky. A bomb released from another aircraft flying above the Purring Panther struck the engine and blew the wing off. The aircraft flipped inverted and crashed into and cut off the tail of Lieutenant Boyd's aircraft. Both planes went into steep dives, exploding on impact with the ground. On another scrap of paper, Elmer had made a drawing that accurately depicted his and others' recollections of the immediate results of that wayward bomb. Over a year later, on August 23, 1945, his family received word from the War Department replacing the missing in action status of their son with a presumptive finding of death. A memorial mass was held at St. Joseph's Church in New Albin on August 30. Locals recalled that the church building would not accommodate all who came to pay their respects. Reverend L. Hayes officiated and delivered the sermon. After Mass, the American Legion post of Lansing and New Albin conducted military rites. Taps were sounded, and the American flag was presented to John's mother, Nellie. Relatives report that John's mother was grateful for the support family members received from the community, but she never fully recovered from the emotional impact of her son's death. On October 6th, the Colsch family received a letter from Brigadier General S.E. Anderson, commander of the 9th Bomber Command, in which he wrote, "Please accept my sincere sympathy. John was a splendid pilot, highly respected by the members of his crew and all those who knew him. His loss is deeply felt by his comrades. His devotion to duty and to our country was unswerving and merited the highest praise." John's family received many letters from his commanding officers in the 9th Air Force, expressing their sympathy and commenting on his remarkable personality. Everyone from shipmate to cadet, to fellow officers and superiors, and his crew knew him not as Sir, not as Lieutenant Colsch, but simply as Smiley. His remains were identified and returned to the United States 5 years later. On August 8, 1949, John W. Colsch was buried in St. Joseph Cemetery near New Albin. The demon in the air now lies at rest near his family and the log cabin where he was born.